The Shepnaz Podcast begins now.
What's going on, friends? Welcome to the Shepnaz Podcast, and happy Monday to you. We hope you're starting off your week. Well, if you're starting it off with this podcast, you know it's starting out good.
Can't get any better.
Come on, it don't get any better than this right here. It's like the world's best morning cup of coffee.
Unless you're fishing.
Unless you're fishing. Yeah, I mean, but you could be listening to this podcast while you're fishing.
And fish at the same time.
It doesn't get better than that. That's right there. True. That's the ultimate. Yeah. Well, wherever you're at and whatever day it is that you're listening to this, we hope that you are having a great day. And so today, if you don't know the format of our podcast that we're doing it right now, we are actually going to be digging into Pastor Rob's sermon. And for the first Monday in quite a while, it's not coming out of Exodus.
Yeah.
How you feel about that? Does it feel weird?
The mass Exodus has finished. Yeah.
Right. Did it feel odd to like open up to a different section in your Bible while you're preparing for this?
Yeah, it did. Yeah. Different commentaries, all that stuff. Had to re-bookmark things in the computer.
Right.
And commentaries and all that. Yeah.
What is happening?
Yeah.
That's wild. Well, if you don't know, if you didn't get a chance to check it out in person or online, we are digging through Galatians right now in our new series. And so let's dig into it, man. Let's dig into it.
Well, it's. I've said this before, maybe not on the podcast, maybe I have, I don't know. I'm getting old, so I probably say things a lot. Sermons are interesting. Sometimes they're like, the Lord will just give you something and you're like, I can sit down and I can work this out and know this is what he's doing. There are other times, and it, a couple hours and it's good. There are other times you spend 10, 15, 20 hours.
Right.
And you're like, I don't even know what I'm going to do, right. And I've likened it to childbirth. And if you're a woman, I hope this isn't offensive to you, but I know there are some women, they have babies and it's way easier than other women.
Right.
Just, last days, and
that's a reality.
I mean, I haven't had one, so I don't know, but if sermons are like a baby, this was not an easy one. This was like one of those.
A difficult birth.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just all the other stuff going on during the week as you're putting it together. It's just like, man, sometimes it just happens and sometimes it doesn't. Maybe it's because I'm just so used to Exodus now, and then we get into Galatians, it's like, oh, it's all different again. I don't know. But anyway, Galatians is an interesting book, and one of my goals is to be able to preach to the whole Bible. And I haven't preached through Galatians here. We've preached from it, but I have not through the whole book. And so we'll probably spend 6 weeks in it. And before summer is here, or close to the time summer gets here, we'll be done and start something else. But it's an interesting book. We call it a book, but it's really a letter. And in terms of biblical literature, it's an epistle, which means it's like a pastoral letter. And so this particular letter was written by Paul. And it's interesting, if you don't know who Paul is, because we haven't talked about the New Testament for a long time, but Paul is one of these guys. He studied under one of the most famous rabbis his name was Gamaliel. And he was a member of this ultra-conservative sect called the Pharisees. And so when you go to hearken back to Exodus, where we had the Ten Commandments, then the religious leaders take the Ten Commandments and then they added to them. A lot, like 603 rules to make it all. So the Pharisees have like 613 rules that they all follow. And Paul was a part of that group, the Pharisees, and they're ultra conservative. So like he was a strict observer of the Mosaic law. Originally, his name was Saul. He was a dangerous persecutor of Christians in the church. And primarily because this new gospel of Jesus came and threatened the efficacy of the Moses law. Literally for thousands of years, people are connecting with God through keeping the law. That's the only way they know to do it.
Right.
And it depended upon their effort to keep the law. And now Jesus comes, he lives his life, and he, is crucified and resurrected. And he says, now you can come to the Father because of something I've done, not something you have to do. So all those who are practicing the law in terms of trying to connect with God are finding themselves kind of on the outs. It's like things have changed. That's not how you do it anymore. Yeah. Well, some people in the church aren't good at letting go of the way things used to be.
Today.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that. Well, that we've never done it that way before. Right. This is what they say. The last words of a dying church is we've never done it that way before.
Right.
Well, that's what's happening in the culture, right? And so Paul or Saul, who was this strict observer of the Mosaic law, is like persecuting these people who are following Jesus now and saying that they can become a follower and connect with God by way of something Jesus did. And he's like, no, this is the way you do it. Yeah. And so he's like so strict that people are hiring him to like, persecute churches and oppress them and beat them into submission to the Mosaic law. Yeah. And literally he is present at for the first martyr in the book of Acts, was Stephen. He was present and didn't stop it. So in a sense, he gave his approval of what was happening. And then, of course, many Christians were beaten and persecuted and oppressed and thrown in jail, all that kind of stuff. Well, this is the guy that wrote the letter. Obviously, he had done, something had happened. So he meets Jesus face to face, has this encounter with Jesus on the road he's going from Jerusalem to Damascus, and literally his life is turned upside down, and he goes from being this crazy persecutor of the Christian church to the most staunch supporter of the church. In fact, he launches out on these missionary journeys, and he's planting churches all over the place. Yeah. And then these letters that we read in the New Testament are a result of him communicating back to the churches that he planted. And so Galatians is like that. So this is one of 13 letters that he has written. This letter is specifically to churches in Antioch, Lystra, Iconium, and Derbe, which is where modern-day Turkey is now. So if you literally, like everyone knows where Iran is on the map right now. If you look at Iran, you head west a little bit, you kind of run into Greece, and you see Israel. If you go straight north of Israel, and then you kind of sort of run into Turkey, or it was called Asia Minor then. Yeah. And this is where all that was. Interestingly, some things specific about this particular letter. This was the first letter Paul wrote, so it's not as polished as the others. Yeah. He actually wrote this in his own hand. And so some of the letters that he told the person what to write, they wrote it down, so they kind of dictated it, and then he would sign it at the end. He wrote this whole letter, so that's a little bit different than the other ones. Yeah. This is also a letter that was written to multiple churches, not just one church. So many of the letters were written to churches in a city, like the church in Philippi or the church in Colossae or whatever. Well, Galatians was different. We'll talk about that, why that's different in a second. But another thing that's interesting about this letter is that all of his other letters, all of the 13, 12 of them, he commends the people. He's like, hey, you're awesome, you're doing a great job, or whatever. He just has some kind of commendation for them. Yeah. There's no commendation here. It's like, and what's interesting is like, this letter has like this extremely personal, in your face, no holds barred, rather militant style, and it's almost as if Paul's like, I'm just skipping the niceties because you're in trouble and you need to hear what I have to say, and he goes right after it, like gets right after it,
just gets to the meat of the matter. Yeah.
So so in this opening series, kind of just some statistics, or not statistics, but just some of the information about the letter. Yep. The letter was written in AD 47. In AD 48. So Paul takes his first missionary journey in AD 47, which is actually, I know this doesn't make sense, but it's really only 15 to 20 years after Jesus' resurrection. Right. And he goes on this journey, and part of the journey, he plants these 4 churches. It's his first missionary journey. He takes 3 altogether. He plants these churches, and then so he goes and he plants the churches, and then when he gets to the farthest church, he circles his way back and stops at each of the churches on his way back to a starting point. Then when he gets back, it's a year later, and he's like, these guys are in trouble, and this is when he writes the letter. We'll talk about the trouble that he's in. Yeah. The other thing that's really important to understand is that this missionary journey in these churches were started just really like 15 years after Jesus' resurrection. And this is important because the old system of connecting to God, this Mosaic law and the sacrifices in the temple is still in place, right? Yeah. I mean, people are still doing that. They still think they have to do that. They're still going to the temple to offer sacrifices. And Paul's like, you don't have to do that anymore. Right. But what we have to understand is that this system was in place for thousands of years. I mean, it was my grandfather did it, my great-grandfather did it, my great-great-grandfather. Everybody did it, but you're saying now I don't have to do that anymore?
Right.
As like people they couldn't wrap their head around this.
Yeah.
And the people who saw Jesus, it was a lot easier. But now we're at this point where people are hearing about Jesus, but they'd never met him. So they're having to understand this through the eyes of people who've met him, or even through converts like we do today. You know?
Right.
We've not necessarily met Jesus in person physically, but we've experienced his power and his transformation in our lives. So that's what was happening, right? So again, the letter, he writes a letter to these newly established churches. And I think it's interesting to think about the churches there, because when we hear the word church, what pops into our mind is the cultural church that we experience today. So here at Shepherd, 600 people. We have a campus in Johnstown. You drive to it. There's a building. Nobody lives here, although we feel like it sometimes.
Right.
But it's like it's a building that you go to, right? You have your programs or whatever. Well, the churches that Paul's planting are house-based churches.
Right.
And so there's a believer, and they're like, this is, all the other believers in the area come to my house on a regular basis, and we do the things that we do in church, right? They probably sang songs, and they took communion, those kind of things, and there was opening of the word or teaching of the word, or these letters that Paul was writing, right?
Yep.
So all of the people also in these churches are new converts. So they're people who have just come to know Jesus, so they don't have this long history. Their parents were probably not Christians.
Right.
They're first generation Christians learning everything for the first time. Everything is brand new, right? And on top of that, add to that there's in these congregations, there's a mix of Jews and non-Jews. And a non-Jew in the New Testament is called a Gentile. So you have Jewish people, and everybody else, if you're not Jewish, you're a Gentile. That's just the way it is, right? Well, these guys they're in the same church together. And so you have the Jewish people who are used to connecting to God through the Mosaic law and keeping the law and the sacrifices and all that.
The old way.
Right. So that's how they do it. They're also in a church with the Gentiles who did not connect to God that way. They came from basically, pagan backgrounds,
right?
Where their worship, there's no God like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's God. There's a God, but it was probably a God that they created. It was maybe a Greek mythological God or something like that, and that was big in this area, Galatia. The goddess of Artemis, and we'll talk about that, or Diana. These guys have no experience with the law, and so. This is what makes up the church.
Interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and Paul's like, so you don't need to do that anymore. You don't need to do that anymore. This is how you do it anymore. So while they didn't have anything in common, the one thing they did have in common was that they all needed to learn a new way to connect to God.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on here, right? And so, in addition to the fact that these churches are new, they're vulnerable to outside influence. And so, like Paul, before he met Jesus, he was trying to help people. He was trying to get people to not follow the way and go back to the old system. There are other people doing that. They're called Judaizers. They're like people who would come in and like, this gospel is not true. Jesus never lived. That's not how you do it. Or you can believe in that, but you also have to do these things, right? And some of the things they were talking about was like, you have to be circumcised too, because all the Jews had to be circumcised because that was a mark of the covenant with Abraham. Right. And they're like, you're not going to be able to inherit the land like God said if you don't have the mark of the covenant. And so, or if you're not following this religious holiday or this festival or whatever. Yeah. So they're throwing all these things in at these people. They don't have pastors who've gone to seminary.
Right.
They don't know what's going on, and so they're confused, right? That's why Paul writes the letter. He's like, I told you the gospel. I told you the truth, and I left. And a year later, you're like going back to the old way of living. Yeah,
you're muddying the waters of what I have given you.
And you're letting these people come into the church and mess up the gospel. So Paul's like, no. And so that's why he writes the letter. He's like, no commendation for them. Just here, I can't believe you've done this. Right. That's literally how he starts out. Like one of the first verses, like, I'm astonished that you're believing these lies.
Are
right?
you kidding me?
Yeah. And so I also I think for me, one of the things that I think is valuable in understanding scriptures is to know what a place was like, right? So to me, it's very fascinating that Galatia is not that far from Iran, where all these things are happening in the world.
Right.
It's just north of Israel, and then there's Lebanon, and then you run into Cyprus, this island, and then just north of that, it's what's called Asia Minor. It's Turkey now, and Greece and Italy, all that's over there. That's right in that area. So I mean, it's like this is when all this is happening. But Galatia is a very, I would say, it was a confused and a confusing place. So first of all, it's confusing geographically, because it was a province and it was a region. What that means is going to Galatia was kind of like saying, I'm going to New York. What does that mean? I'm going to New York City.
Right.
I'm going to the state of New York. I'm going to upstate New York in the mountains, or I'm going into a very urban environment. Or
right.
It's just not clear, right? And so as a region, Galatia had this very defined boundary and was home to people who were called the Gauls. That's kind of where Galatia comes from, right? But it also, 25 years before Jesus' death, it was taken over by the Roman Empire, and it became like a Roman Empire. So now to say I'm going to Galatia could mean I'm going to that part that's defined where the Gauls live, or this whole section of Asia Minor, which is now the Roman Empire, was referred to as Galatia. So, I mean, when you say Galatia, I'm like, I really don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's like you and I saying we're from Columbus.
Right.
I mean,
right.
Because that could mean Westerville, Blacklick, Pataskala, New Albany, Gahanna, Whitehall, whatever.
Yep.
We're from Columbus, but we're really from Gahanna or Columbus or Pataskala or wherever it is that we live, or Etna, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So
it can change very quickly. In a short amount of time, I even think of our two campuses, right?
Yeah.
Like Gahanna versus Johnstown, two very different places.
Yeah.
It's all technically right around the same area.
Right.
But two very different environments.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. Right. So they all had, the one thing they had in common is it was ruled by the Romans.
Yeah.
So there's the confusion about the geography of it, but then there's also in Galatia, in the Roman Empire, religious pluralism was abundant. So what I mean by that is that there was a lot of different gods that were being worshipped. The primary one was there's a pagan worship of Greek and Roman gods. And when we did the book of Ephesians, we talked a little bit about this. Ephesus was not far from Galatia,
right.
50 miles, maybe 60 miles. I don't think it was that far away. And Ephesus was the home of the Temple of Diana, which at the time was one of the 7 wonders of the world. It was a massive temple. Diana was a Greek goddess from Greek mythology. She was passionately worshipped in the Roman Empire, and that included Galatia. So in that area, Artemis or Diana, which is the same, was being worshipped. There were altars in everybody's homes for her. They all had idols of her. And the worship of Diana was so widespread and important to the area that when the temple was built, it was a combined effort of all the cities in Asia Minor. It wasn't just an effort in Ephesus. It was everybody came and did it, and that includes people in Galatia. So that was a primary thing. They also experienced emperor worship, which means the Roman emperor was worshipped like a god.
Right.
And then also Judaism was huge. And so you have all the Jewish synagogues who are still teaching the old ways of connecting to God. And then on top of all that, you have Christianity trying to spread in that mix. And the lack of spiritual maturity of the new converts who are I don't know if this is right. I mean, they didn't have the Bible like we have.
Yeah.
They had the Torah, they had the Old Testament, some of those things, but the New Testament is being written.
Yeah. They're living it right now.
And literally some of the Gospels haven't been written, so they don't have the written word of Jesus. They're going by what you saw Jesus, you heard him. What did he say?
Right.
This is how it's going around.
Yeah.
So it's it's a really interesting environment. Lots of things going on. I think it's similar to today.
I was going to say, it's a melting pot.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not different than how it is today, man. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Paul writes this letter, and there's 3 primary reasons that he writes the letter. First of all, when Paul left the churches and he walks in, we're getting close in here.
Yeah.
When Paul left, these false teachers come in, and they're like, that Paul guy, he's a liar.
Yeah.
They're like, he was just persecuting Christians, and now he's telling you should do these kind of things. So they question the credibility of Paul. The problem with that is that if the credibility of the teacher is questioned, then the credibility of their message is questioned.
Yep.
And so when they come in and they question Paul's credibility, they're also questioning the credibility of the gospel. So now they're thinking like, oh, Paul did that. How can we believe what he said? How can we trust him, right?
Yep.
And then so he's like, first of all, I've got to regain my credibility, and he does that in verse 1.
Yep.
And then he comes in and he says, and because I have some credibility, even if I didn't have credibility, the gospel still has credibility. And he talks about that. And then he's like, I want to make sure that you don't go back.
Right.
Like, don't revert back to this the Judaism. And so, when we talk about why should we study something like this, I think that the potential for false teachings regarding the gospel is potentially even larger today. Like, there's so many versions of the gospel, and the truth is there's the gospel, and if you add anything to it or you take anything away from it, it's not the gospel.
Yep.
It's something else.
Yep.
And so I think, this is someone, one of the persons I was studying last week said that Galatians is the strongest word against legalism in the Bible. Yeah. It's like God's handbook on legalism.
Yep.
And so that's really interesting. Which legalism, which is really what the Mosaic law was, it was like, here's the definition of that. We'll wrap this up here in just a second. So legalism is the belief that a person can gain or maintain right standing with God primarily by strictly following religious rules, laws, or rituals, rather than by faith and grace. So the gospel is like, Jesus already did it. You have faith in it, and that's grace, right? But the old system is you got to do this, and you got to not do this, and you got to go to this festival, and you got to go to the temple, you got to offer this kind of sacrifice. So legalism was the primary thing that the gospel came against, right? And so Paul's like, this is what I'm trying to come against. The letter is divided into 3 parts. First, Paul is like, I got to establish my credibility as an apostle. He starts off doing that. Then he's like, I got to make sure everybody understands the gospel for sure. This is what the gospel really is. And then he's like, then I need them to know and understand how it plays out. Right. And that's kind of the division of the Galatian, the book letter to the Galatians. And so, yeah, I enjoy that kind of stuff. I like being able to identify what the culture was like then, how it's similar, because there's differences, but there's similarities. Right. And so I'm not just reading this letter that was to somebody, thousands of years ago. It literally, people today struggle with the same stuff. Right. And sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's not. But this book speaks to the life we live today. Yep. And so I'm excited to dive into it. And so we'll be talking about, that's what we'll be talking about.
Absolutely. Well, make sure you come back tomorrow as we continue to dive into this. Hopefully you got a lot of the history and the story behind this and why it really does make sense to look at the big picture of these things, right? The area that it was, why he's even writing these letters, his personal backstory. There's so many pieces to it. So make sure you dig in with us tomorrow as we continue to see how this applies to us today. We would love it if you would share this stuff. We don't just want to say it because we want to be a big podcast, but we believe that the message of Jesus Christ is something worth sharing. So if you could do that for us, that would be amazing. We love you. We hope you have a great day.
This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.